You've probably met them before. Maybe you even were one of them. The child who never caused trouble, who always followed the rules, who sat quietly in the corner while chaos erupted around them. Society celebrates these children. Parents beam with pride. Teachers give them gold stars. But what if I told you that beneath that perfect exterior lies one of the most overlooked forms of childhood trauma? Here is what nobody talks about. The quietest child in the room is often carrying the heaviest emotional load, while everyone else is focused on the disruptive kids, the loud ones, the troublemakers. There is a different kind of suffering happening in plain sight. It is the suffering of the child who learned too early that their authentic self wasn't welcome. Picture this scenario. You are watching a classroom full of children. One kid is bouncing off the walls, another is asking a million questions, and there in the back sits a child, perfectly still, hands folded, waiting patiently. Which child gets the attention? Which one gets the concern? It is never the quiet one. But here is the twist. That quiet child might be the one who needs help the most. Every human being enters this world with raw, unfiltered emotions. Babies cry when they're hungry, laugh when they're delighted, and rage when they're frustrated. This isn't bad behavior. It is authentic expression. But somewhere along the way, some children receive a devastating message. Your feelings are too much, your needs are inconvenient, and your authentic self is unacceptable. When a child realizes that their laughter is too loud, their questions are too many, and their tears are inappropriate, something profound happens. They begin to edit themselves, they start trading pieces of their soul for approval. And this trade, made in childhood, often haunts them for decades to come. Let me paint you a picture of how this unfolds. Imagine a 5-year-old who naturally wants to explore, question, and express. But every time they show excitement, they're told to calm down. When they express sadness, they're told to stop being dramatic. They're met with disapproval or punishment. What is a child's survival instinct going to do? It is going to adapt. It is going to learn that safety lies in becoming smaller, quieter, more agreeable. This is where we need to understand something crucial about childhood development. Children are wired for attachment above all else. They will sacrifice anything, including their authentic self, to maintain connection with their caregivers. When a child perceives that love is conditional on good behavior, they'll become the best behaved child you've ever seen. But the cost is astronomical. What emerges is what psychologists call a false self, a carefully constructed persona designed to meet other people's expectations. This false self becomes so practiced, so automatic, that the child forgets there was ever anything else underneath. They become the adult who says, "I am fine," when they're falling apart inside, who takes on everyone else's emotional burdens while neglecting their own, who has mastered the art of being what others need, but has no idea what they themselves want. Here is where it gets really interesting. These children often become incredibly skilled at reading people and situations. They develop an almost supernatural ability to anticipate what others need and to adjust themselves accordingly. They become empathetic, sensitive, and attuned to emotional nuances that others miss entirely. These are genuine gifts, but they come at a price that is almost too high to calculate. The price is authenticity. The price is knowing who you really are beneath all the adaptation. The price is the ability to trust your own feelings, needs, and desires. And perhaps most tragically, the price is the capacity to believe that you are lovable just as you are, without having to earn it through perfect behavior. Now, let's fast forward to adulthood. What does the former obedient child look like 30 years later? They're often the ones everyone depends on. They're the reliable friend, the dedicated employee, the partner who never rocks the boat. On the surface, they seem to have it all together. But if you look closer, you'll notice something troubling. They struggle to say no, even when they're completely overwhelmed. They take on extra work, extra responsibilities, extra emotional labor, because somewhere deep inside, they still believe their worth depends on how useful they are to others. They listen endlessly to friends' problems, but rarely share their own struggles, because they learned early that their needs weren't as important as keeping others comfortable. In romantic relationships, they often become the accommodating partner who bends over backward to avoid conflict. They'll sacrifice their own preferences, desires, and boundaries to keep the peace. But here is the cruel irony. This very accommodation often leads to relationships that lack depth and genuine intimacy because one person is always performing rather than simply being. The workplace becomes another stage for this performance. They're the employees who stay late, take on thankless tasks, and absorb criticism without defending themselves. They watch as more assertive colleagues get promoted while they remain invisible, wondering why their dedication isn't being recognized. What they don't realize is that their inability to advocate for themselves, learned in childhood as a survival strategy, is now sabotaging their adult success. But perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect is the internal experience. Many of these adults describe feeling like they're living someone else's life. They've become so good at being what others need that they've lost touch with their own desires, dreams, and authentic voice. They might achieve external success, but internally they feel empty, disconnected from themselves, and unsure of their own identity. This is what researchers call authenticity loss, and it is more common than you might think. When a person spends decades suppressing their true self, that self doesn't just disappear, it goes underground. It waits, sometimes for years, for a safe enough moment to emerge. Sometimes it breaks through in unexpected ways, sudden bursts of creativity, inexplicable emotional reactions, or a growing sense of restlessness that can't be explained by external circumstances. The awakening often begins with a simple but profound question: who am I when I am not trying to make everyone else happy? This question can be terrifying because it challenges the entire foundation upon which these individuals have built their lives. But it is also the beginning of a journey back to authenticity. Here is what makes this particularly complex. Society actively rewards obedient behavior. We praise the quiet child, the compliant employee, the accommodating partner. We've built systems, educational, professional, even familial, that function more smoothly when people comply rather than question, adapt rather than assert, perform rather than simply be authentic. But what happens when an entire generation grows up prioritizing compliance over authenticity? We end up with adults who can function beautifully within systems but struggle to innovate, create, or challenge when those systems need to evolve. We get people who can follow directions but have difficulty trusting their own instincts or pursuing their own visions. This has broader implications than just individual suffering. Innovation, creativity, and social progress often come from people who are willing to challenge existing norms, to think differently, to risk disapproval in service of truth. When we over-reward obedience, we might be accidentally suppressing the very qualities that help societies grow and adapt. The path back to authenticity isn't simple, but it is possible. It often begins with what psychologists call re-parenting, learning to give yourself the acceptance and validation that you needed as a child, but didn't receive. This means developing an internal voice that says, your feelings matter, your needs are valid, and you don't have to earn love through perfect behavior. One of the most powerful steps is learning to notice the difference between your authentic response and your conditioned response. When someone asks you to do something, what is your immediate internal reaction before you automatically say yes? When you are in a group conversation, what do you actually think before you default to agreeable nodding? These moments of awareness are the beginning of reclaiming your authentic self. Another crucial element is developing what researchers call differentiation, the ability to maintain your own identity while still being in relationship with others. This means learning that you can disappoint someone without being a bad person, that you can have different opinions without damaging relationships, and that healthy boundaries actually strengthen rather than weaken connections. For many former obedient children, this process involves grieving. They need to grieve the childhood where their authentic self wasn't welcomed, the years spent performing rather than living, and the relationships that were built on who they pretended to be rather than who they really are. This grief, while painful, is also cleansing. It makes space for something new to emerge. The journey back to authenticity often reveals something beautiful. The qualities that made someone an obedient child, empathy, sensitivity, attunement to others, don't have to disappear. They can be integrated with newfound assertiveness, self-advocacy, and authentic expression. The result is someone who can be both kind and boundaried, empathetic and self-caring, cooperative, and authentically individual. Here is what is particularly hopeful. When former obedient children begin to reclaim their authentic selves, they often become powerful advocates for others who are struggling with similar issues. Having experienced the cost of overcompliance, they can spot it in others and offer the kind of understanding and permission that they needed themselves. They become parents who encourage their children to express their full range of emotions. They become friends who create space for others to be imperfect and real. They become colleagues who model the possibility of being both professional and authentic. In breaking their own patterns of over-obedience, they give others permission to do the same. But let's be honest about the challenges. Choosing authenticity over compliance isn't always immediately rewarded. Sometimes it creates conflict. Sometimes it disappoints people who are comfortable with your accommodating nature. Sometimes it means outgrowing relationships or situations that were built on your willingness to suppress yourself. Yet, here is what many people discover: the relationships and opportunities that emerge when you show up authentic. This doesn't mean becoming selfish or inconsiderate. True authenticity includes genuine care for others, but it means caring for others from a place of choice rather than compulsion, from fullness rather than emptiness, from strength rather than fear. If you recognize yourself in this description, know that your journey toward authenticity is not just personal healing, it is cultural healing. Every time someone chooses truth over performance, authenticity over compliance, they contribute to a world where children might grow up feeling safer to be themselves. The obedient child you once were deserves compassion, not judgment. That child was doing their best to survive and find love in the circumstances they were given. But the adult you are now has choices that child didn't have. You can choose relationships that celebrate your authenticity. You can choose work that aligns with your values. You can choose to honor your feelings, needs, and desires as valid and important. The hidden pain of the obedient child is real, but it is not the end of the story. Within that pain lies sensitivity, empathy, and a deep understanding of what it means to long for authentic connection. These qualities, when integrated with self-advocacy and healthy boundaries, create individuals who can contribute to the world in uniquely powerful ways. Your obedience may have kept you safe as a child, but your authenticity is what will allow you to truly live as an adult. The world doesn't need another person who can perfectly follow the rules. It needs people who can think critically, feel deeply, and contribute their unique gifts and perspectives. The journey from hidden pain to authentic living is not easy, but it is profoundly worthwhile, because at the end of the day, the greatest gift you can give to yourself and to the world is not your compliance, but your truth. Not your performance, but your presence. Not your obedience, but your authentic, beautifully human self.